Alright, welcome back to Don't Think, Just Charge. I'm Dave, that's Harvey, and today we're going through the one-page rules tournament packs that have been released for the 2024 to 2025 season. Alright, so in 2024, One Page Rules released alongside its tournament guidelines this 2024 to 2025 seasonal tournament pack. The aim of this pack was to set out some supported guidelines for tournament organisers to run their own events and give a bit of OPR backing and easily accessible guidance for when you're running it. We know from running events in the past this does take a lot of work, so the purpose of this pack is to take a whole load of burden off of the tournament organisers and give them a bit of a build-a-bear approach to running their own events. What we're going to do is we're going to run through very, very briefly all of the background to it, and we're going to focus on what matters for you, the players, which is the scenarios and how to bring some of the best possible armies so you can get the big old W at the end of the day. So the tournament pack is set out to be up until September 2025, so we're only a few months away from something new, which will be exciting. And it goes through some of the background. It could be a casual competitive event, who are the people in the tournament, how to set it up. Interestingly, it suggests as an optional rule, including some of the advanced rules. We're not going to focus on that today, but it's worth noting that we know that some communities around the world do enjoy using some of these advanced rules, and there's a bit of support to indicate it. We've used advanced casting in one of our events. I'm looking at the Grimdark Future pack here, but this one suggests 2,000 points and the Age of Fantasy one suggests 1,500 points. Again, I think that's there to make sure the events are a bit quicker. And then we go through things like conduct guidelines and preparing and scoring and line of sight. We're not going to focus on that now because as we get through this, we're going to turn to a big event that's coming up that's important for Harvey and I, which is the UK Games Expo 2025 pack. So stick around to the end and we'll be going into a bit more of the specifics around that particular pack. The first scenario that the pack provides for you is called the Storm. They are all a bit different. There are 4 set out in the pack. And the first one, I think, is a nice, more straightforward approach to how you normally play one-page rules. I'll show you the deployment first. It is 3 fixed objectives. This is all set out for a 6x4 board. 3 objectives, all on the middle line, 18 inches apart. So quite a neutral objective deployment. If you want to consider some of our thoughts on deploying the objectives in a game, go check out our video on objectives. But this one, you bring 2 armies of equal points. You have 3 objectives, and it's typical hold of an objective. At the end of each round, you seize it, and it stays under your control. Same as normal OPR, you roll off, the winner picks one of the deployment zones, and then you alternate placing, and then whoever won the deployment roll goes first. And the scoring is base OPR with a slight variant. At the end of the game, you get 1 VP for each objective you control, and then here's something that does matter in this. You get a bonus VP if you seize more objectives than your opponent in the last round. So there's something that can have quite a few ties happen. Harvey, talk to me about, before we go on to the optional rules, talk to me about your thoughts on the scoring for this mission.
So I think the interesting thing to know about the scoring here is because of that extra 1 VP you get from seizing objectives, that means in the last round, if you seize a single of your opponent's objectives, then you're guaranteed at least a draw, which is a massive swing. It means you can draw a 2-to-1 split. Now what that means is actually taking objectives in this game mode is bad. Like, you just don't want them at all, right? Like, if you have control of the board, you should be able to seize them when you want, and seizing them early only sets you up for that annoying situation. If you have a single objective held going into round 4, then your opponent can guarantee draw the game by just taking that one, and that's an enormous amount of pressure to have to control the board across the full width of it like that. So this is a strange game mode in that what you want is, first of all, you want enough units to be around at the end of the game to be able to take all 3 objectives, which isn't always easy for some armies. But second of all, you don't want to take them until the last round. So you're kind of incentivized to, this is a very, very brawly, bloody game, right? Where the objectives take a kind of sideline, and actually you're avoiding the objectives, so they're almost like impassable terrain for some things, right?
It's a huge area. It's a dead zone where you don't want to go. I've played this scenario a few times now, And the first time I played it, I let my units kind of bumble onto the points, and then I went, oh, this is a mistake. Thankfully, I was at that point playing a really aggressive, it was a War Havoc Brothers army. So I then just went shove, 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 wipe out my opponent and rush onto them. But after that, when I've been playing this mission, you really want to stay so clear. And it can cut off huge sections of the board. One of the games I played, I had difficult terrain either side of the 3-inch surround zone of one of the objectives in my way, and I just had to take the point because otherwise I'd have never made it into the game.
Yeah, and you can play around this as well, right? You can put your units on the edge of an objective and force your opponent, if they make that charge, to take the objective.
Yeah.
Which is like, it's such a weird thing for a chaff unit to be doing, moving up to the edge of an objective and sitting there.
Yeah.
But it's like totally valid now, right? Because you can definitely win the game off just the seizing. And it's interesting in that the first game of the tournament is probably the one that's going to lead to the most draws.
Yeah.
Because of that, right? You know, even if it's an absolute stomp, if you lose one objective at the end, then it's a draw. So it's an interesting and kind of weird take on the standard OPR game.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see as we go through this pack a little bit later on, there are no standard OPR games really in this pack, which I think is a bit of a shame, to be honest. I think, you know, standard OPR should always exist in tournaments, and we shouldn't get 4 completely new ones every time. But I'm okay with a slight compromise like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, but OPR is great, right?
Like, it's nice to have these variants, but let's not overlook that we still enjoy base OPR and we think it's a really good core for the game. But okay, so we've got this slightly changed base OPR. Now, we're going to talk about these special rules because when we come onto the UK Games Expo pack, they are all using these special rules for each scenario. So we're going to have a little bit of a chat about them because it does matter for the practical application later. So the special rule for this mission is the Psychic Storm. So this is your storm part. At the beginning of each round, each player rolls a dice, or, well, you roll 2 dice. I've played it that each player rolls a dice, and then you apply the effects of both. If the same effect is rolled twice, so if you get a pair of 3s, instead you disregard those, and each player chooses one, starting with the player who gets the first turn. So, going through these, rolls 1 to 3 are bad for casters. Roll number 1, whenever you cast a spell, so that is you've succeeded at casting a spell, you roll a die, and on a 1 to 3, there's no effect, so just kills it. Roll number 2, when casting if the roll result is equal or lower than the current round number, the caster takes as many hits as the round number. Now, that is hilarious because in round 4, I've seen, in my tests of this, a lot of casters kill themselves, which is, you know, just absolutely hilarious. Roll number 3, when casting, roll 1 die to randomly determine which spell you may try to cast, and you can't manually pick, so you don't get a choice of what you're doing. Roll number 4, this is where we get the positives. All casters get +1 to casting rolls, I like that. Roll 5, all spells get double range, that can be quite good. And roll 6, all casters can try and cast a free level 1 spell, which is really fun. Now, there's a lot to talk about this, which is, I'm not going to focus on it too much, but one of the hilarious things that happens is when you get a positive and a negative. And for some reason, the dice in my test games are drawn to 6 and 2. Which means that in round 4, I think I've done it to myself 3 times now, where I've had a caster who's low on health and I've gone, hey, let's throw a free level 1 spell out. I've rolled less than a 4, or a 4 or under, and then he's just taken 4 hits and died. So you can shoot yourself in the foot with this.
Nothing's free in life, I think is the saying, right? Yeah, so going through 1 to 6 here, interference is obviously the worst for casters here. It's like fearful casting almost, right? Like a 1 to 3 to fail instead of 4 to 6 to pass.
Yeah.
That's a really, really bad one to come up against, and if you can avoid it, do not cast on those turns. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's the caveat of if 2 players roll the same dice, then they can pick, which means if you're playing against a hard caster list, this is definitely the one you want to pick each round if you get those doubles. So the next one here is Risk. I think this one is probably lower threat, only because it's, interestingly enough, the roll result and not what you actually roll on the dice. So equal or lower, so that means in round 4 if you roll a 4, so even if you succeed on the cast, you would fail. But if you pump any amount of points into it from a different caster or from the same caster, then you greatly reduce the actual risk of risk, interestingly enough. So I think this is cool. I'm kind of a fan of pumping my spells anyway, so I think this has less of an impact than maybe it would do otherwise.
Yeah.
If you're pumping 2 points into it, then you need to roll a 3 or higher, which is still not great to avoid this effect. But if you're in round 4, oftentimes you're probably not too fussed about your caster taking hits as long as the spell actually goes off, because most of the time round 4 spells is like cleaning things up, not like, you know. So yeah, risk is an interesting one. It's nowhere near as bad as interference, which is probably what you expect from it being on a 2.
One of the things I would say, just a little tip for players, in general with tournaments, communicate so clearly, especially as you're getting to those last rounds of the day. You're tired, your opponent's tired. Do make sure you're being very clear when you're using, say, 3 caster points from one caster to cast a level 3 spell, 2 points from another to pump the result by 2. Declare that so clearly so that you don't roll a 3, your opponent goes, haha, and you go, no, that's a 5, and they go, oh, I didn't realise that. It just, obviously that has no real effect on the bearing of the game, but it can avoid some feels bad moments, and of course communication is really key, so just 1 point to be really clear when this is in play, and in general.
So the third one's confusion. I think this one is nowhere near as bad as it seems, because it says what spell you may try to cast next. So you actually get 1 free spell per round where you do get to pick, and it's only the second one in the round that gets confusioned. So this to me is most of the time not bad.
Yeah.
I think it's not entirely clear.
I think that word next needs to be clarified. Because
Yeah,
I agree
I
with you
also-
on the way it's written, that's how it comes across, but I don't know if that's how it's intended.
Well, when you're casting, you've already decided the spell. Is
Yeah.
how casting works.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
So
exactly.
It's one of those, yeah. The other thing that's not entirely clear is this on a model by model basis, or is this across your whole army? You know, like if it's a model by model, it's basically not really that relevant, right?
Exactly.
Like, you may occasionally get blocked out of being able to throw out a level 1 after you throw out a level 3 or 2 or whatever, but most of the time the first spell you're casting is the most important one. The only exception to that is the weird interaction with Omnipotence down in 6. So 4, not really massive amount to talk about here. It plays nicely with Risk. So yeah, if your opponent picks Risk, then you pick Power, then sure. That's a nice little way of countering that. I think this is probably one of the more powerful ones on the list.
Yeah, I agree.
Reliability is really great in a competitive list. So yeah, all thumbs up around that. The other thing that obviously needs clarifying here as well is that it doesn't tell you what order. Oh no, it does. Sorry, starting with the player that gets in it first and next. Okay, that's fine. I was going to say because you can counterpick these obviously, right? So if you're going first, then picking Omnipotence might lead your opponent to pick Confusion.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't want to pick up Omnipotence if you're not getting that. If you got that first guess. But picking Power is a relatively safe bet because it doesn't really have any impact on the other ones. And then Enlightenment, I would say it's extremely situational. It's a bit of a dud, really, I think, a lot of the time.
I think this is actually the weakest one of the positives because when you're playing, when you're in the point, in round 1, this can be pretty sweet because if you've got a 12-inch damage spell you want to get off and you've got 12-inch range and it's suddenly a 24, you've got a 36-inch range threat and you're beyond deployment zones. Any time past that, you're probably in range of the spell. You've hopefully been trying to set up your position of your casters to have their choice targets. But yeah, I think if these were the roles at the start of the round were determined for the next round, that would be interesting because then you can condition your movement on it. But it's not. It's at the start of the round, so your pieces are already in place, and it's an extra bit of reaction. It's a slight change on your activation priority and your target priority, but it's not the strongest one here at all. I think, therefore, it's the worst.
Yeah. The other thing about Enlightenment that makes it slightly stronger than perhaps we can make credit for is obviously this is really good for like 2 target 6/6 hits.
Yeah.
Because where previously you might be strained to get within 12 inches of both those at the same time, now you basically have pick of the board really where you want to put those effects down, which does make those effects a lot more powerful. But I think overall, if you're picking one, you're very rarely picking Enlightenment. It's extremely situational. Yeah. And then Omnipotence, I think I'd rather have Power than Omnipotence.
I agree.
It depends if you're picking first or second. Because realistically, you're not going to pump points into this, so it's 50-50 a level 1 spell. I think if you get it, then you're pretty happy with it. There are lots of decent little, Blast 3 spells or Reduced Moon Speed or whatever it might be. But overall, I think if you're looking for the positive ones, then you're going for Power.
Yeah. Power and interference.
Yeah.
If you're... So there's a nice strategic approach to this of if you get that double roll and you have fewer casters alive than your opponent, you want to pick a negative effect. Even more so if your opponent has any casters and you have no casters, right? And so I'm picking interference, I think, nearly every time there. And conversely,
I think so.
they're going to pick power. I think power's the best one to pick.
Yeah, and I think with the one place where this slightly favours spellcasters is obviously you don't need to cast when they pick the bad one.
Mm-hmm.
You basically want to throw out as many spell tokens as you can when the good things are on the board. But if there's then a bad round followed up by like 2 negative ones, you can just wait that turn if you can, as much as you as best as you can, I guess, and go with that, or try and mitigate it as much as you want. I think unfortunately interference makes the issue with spellcasting, i.e. single dice rolls, much worse.
Yeah.
It's now, it's like, wow, you could get absolutely blasted in this game if you try and go heavy spellcaster. But I think overall this probably does favour spellcasting more than it doesn't favour spellcasting.
Yeah.
Because really, risk and confusion aren't guaranteed bad effects. Interference isn't guaranteed, but it's an awful one if it goes off. And then the other 3 are all obviously very positive. So I think it favours casters more than it doesn't favour casters.
Yeah. So as a net kind of comment on this pack, I'm of the view that, of this mission in the pack, I'm of the view that this would encourage me to take at least 1, if not 2 casters.
Yeah, at the very least, just so you can play the game with risk. So you can debuff their spellcasting and hopefully have them blow up their casters, because that would be quite efficient.
Yeah. Good. Let's move on to the second mission, which is Moonfight, or we call it Moon Bounce when we're playing this one. Yeah. This is a bit of a chaotic one, so I'm going to skate through some of the rules to it. It's standard OPR deployment, picking up and controlling objectives is the same. The variation here is that it's at the end of each round you get 1 VP for each objective marker you control. So this is what we call progressive scoring. Plus 1 VP if you control more objective markers than your opponent. Now, this is a pretty typical rider to see on a progressive scoring scorecard. You get, if you control 2, your opponent controls 1, you get 2, they get 1, and then you get a bonus 1 for controlling more. You see that very often. But you will also see catch-up mechanics. So if you're behind, you get something to get you back into the game. The advanced rules have twists and gambits that have got underdog bonuses as well. And I love those underdog bonuses because they make it dynamic. What this actually encourages is taking an early lead and holding it, which it can be really hard to come back from sometimes. So that's an interesting point about this. The map deployment, again, we've got fixed objectives. On a 6x4, you've got these 2 24-inch deployment zones, 4 objectives placed quite jankily around the board, which I really like this deployment. I think this is an interesting and dynamic game that shifts the way that OPR plays.
Yeah, I think the big thing about Moon Bounce is that, as you mentioned, it's that snowball mechanic. I think this of all the games we're going to look at today, maybe not actually, but pretty close to it, is going to be the most like I got an early lead and therefore I won the game, which then puts huge emphasis on Scout.
Yeah.
In a massive way, right? If you look at how far away that objective is on the left from the deployment zone in the bottom right, we're talking, I think it's 12 inches followed by another 18 inches, 30 inches away.
Yeah.
If you have a way of getting onto that objective round 1 and neutralizing it, you're probably going to win because they can't do the same thing to you unless they built for that, and the middle ones can be contested by anyone. So you could very quickly find yourself, 1 point up in the first round, and then you're still playing in that field, maybe then another extra point up in the second round, and then all of a sudden they can't win anymore. So I think this is obviously a very snowbally game. It's literally written into the rules. But yeah, I think it's good to see this kind of stuff. I think the deployment zone has been 24 by 24. It's actually like a crap ton of space, really. Doesn't really restrict you in any sort of meaningful way. And having really far away objectives adds a little bit of list building variety. If it does emphasize Scout a little bit.
Yeah, I think it does. But the nice thing is that for each deployment zone, so for Zone B, this is your home quote objective. That's the closest one to your deployment zone. You have also got this one, which, if you're considering from the Zone P perspective, is equally as close, but because that is closer to Zone A, it is your safer home objective, and then the same for this bottom one for Zone A. So if you're in Zone B, if you can scout 12 inches and move, you have to be able to scout 12 inches and move fast, I think, to be able to hit this one. So hounds in Age of Fantasy.
Yeah.
What have we got? Anything in the Lust Demons list in Grimdark Future will do it. But if you can pressure that, that is the way that you can stop your opponent from getting that parity, and therefore you take the bonus VP, and then you're in the lead and can hopefully keep up some pressure. So yeah, Scout, very valuable in this game mode. Now, I've touched on being fast. Let's have a look at the special rule, which makes this chaos. So this is called Reduced Gravity. Whenever a unit moves, it must pick one of the following types of movement. So you pick either Lumbering Gait or Moon Bounce. Lumbering Gait, you get the slow, effectively the slow rule. Note that if you are slow, you still take this effect, so -2 on advance and -4 on Russian charges. If you're slow, that means you're moving 2 inches on advance and 4 inches on Russian charge, so very, very slow. Or the other one you can choose is Moon Bounce, where you get the inverse, which is effectively fast or speed boost. You get +2, +4, but with a caveat. The unit must move its full move in a straight line until it hits an obstacle, which we'll come back to what that means. And if it ends its movement in terrain, or within 1 inch of any units that it wasn't charging, it must take a dangerous terrain test. So just going through some of the definitions that are in there. What is an obstacle? An obstacle is something that would obscure or block movement. So a wall that's over 3 inches, for example, or a building, or another enemy unit, or impassable terrain. I think those are all of the definitions of obstacle. There might be some more which Harvey will correct me on.
It's very much, well, it's very much just like the English usage of the word, which for a competitive rule pack isn't great because we're not necessarily all playing it, and we're not necessarily English native speakers, and translations come into this and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, I mean, typically an obstacle is something that prevents you from moving.
Yeah, and the thing that isn't is difficult terrain. Now, I interpret this as to say that the rules of difficult terrain are still in effect. So if you moon bounce into difficult terrain, your maximum move can still be 6 inches unless you've got Strider or Flying. As a note on flying ignores... I don't know if it ignores impassable terrain, but it ignores impassable. So it ignores obstacle. So it ignores units, it ignores terrain, so you can fly over these obstacles to avoid that. Flying here might be both better and worse because of that. Then of course, if you...
It makes stopping on objectives a lot harder.
It makes stopping on objectives a lot harder if you've got flying. What are your immediate thoughts on these special rules?
I think this is obviously the most. I think this is the least clearly described of the rules. Yeah, at least written of the optional rules, because it changes the game so fundamentally. Like you basically got to question every single line, which is a lot. I think. I think that the in terms of the clarity stuff, right? So what does it mean for a unit to move in a straight line? Right, we don't move units, we move models. So does that mean the unit has to stay in its formation and it has to be moved wholesale off the board? Does that mean every model within the unit has to move in a straight line? Stuff like that, right? Like if one side of the unit clips an obstacle, does the whole unit have to stop then for coherency purposes? Well, you'd assume so, but is it like a majority rule? Like how does that work? There's obviously a little bit about obstacles. That's not very clear. Difficult terrain, as you spoke about. If you moon bounce through difficult terrain, does that mean you just moon bounce 6 inches, or does that mean you can't moon bounce through difficult terrain? How do you play that? So unfortunately, I think this rule is just like missing an extra paragraph, maybe, of clarification. And I know that's not in the spirit of OPR normally, but we're talking about a tournament pack here, right? Yeah. So it's time to shift that kind of OPR paradigm of less words and go like, oh, actually, this is completely unclear and it's going to get played in 40 different ways depending on who's at the table. If we're assuming that you can, let's say, you moon bounce into difficult terrain, stop or whatever, or go over it, and all the other stuff is just like you move models or whatever it might be, it changes the game in a really interesting way. It gives every scout unit that thing we were talking about where you needed fast to get onto the point, which is interesting. Basically means that if you have scout, you can always contest their point, which makes scout very much more powerful because you're no longer looking for those scout fast combos. I think this changes the game in a way that I don't think makes it as fun.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think movement's a big part of OPR, and giving everyone fast takes away a lot of those kind of decisions. And most of the time, you're charging a straight line anyway in OPR. So it's interesting. I think I don't think this is the kind of optional rule I like to see in these kind of packs.
No.
And I also don't think that I don't think it makes the game more fun, unfortunately. So
One of the
I'm
things
not a massive fan of this game mode.
I observed the other night when we were doing some playtesting of this, a chap on the table next to me had brought a lot of walkers with 60mm round bases to his game. It was on, because it was UKGE testing, it was on a 4x4. His walkers were clipping up obstacles every time they moved. He couldn't get a straight line onto an objective, and so he just suffered, really. And I think he's now considering changing the army he was planning on bringing, because he's played this and been like, wow, that is really unfun. That is really difficult for me to bring this army I wanted to bring. So yeah, there's one thing.
Yeah, another rule as well that, like as you mentioned, is this is not model agnostic.
Yeah.
Right. Give me 3mm bases, and this ain't a rule anymore. Right. And obviously no one's going to do that, but you know, like the choice between a 25mm and a 32mm is not completely foreign, and 25mm is much better there. And you know, for the bigger bases, you know, you see people who kind of cram their walkers into these tiny little bases where they've got like their feet hanging over the edges.
Yeah.
And that's a massive advantage here.
Yeah.
So yeah, not a fan of this rule, unfortunately.
Okay, so your takeaway though from seeing this, so we talked about in mission 1, we're thinking we want casters in our army for this event. In this one, we're thinking scout.
Yeah, definitely. This is a huge, hugely advantage if you have scout, and I think maybe ambush suffers here a little bit because of that snowballing effect early on.
Remembering that
realistically, by the time,
sorry.
Yeah, can't contest objectives exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the turn, so your ambushes aren't coming in until they're coming on round 2, which you know you should always come in on round 2, but they can't contest until round 3. At that point, half the points of the game have already gone, and if you've got units that aren't contesting objectives, then that snowball effect isn't coming into your favor.
Exactly.
And by round 2, every unit can make it to the other objective.
Yeah.
Because of moon jump. You could moon jump.
So you're better deploying your ambushes normally in this, I think.
Yeah. The only other thing that we haven't really touched on here is because you can either move exactly fast or slow, there's actually this middle ground where you can't affect things if it's an objective, right? So if an objective sits between this zone, you can no longer contest that objective because you're not fast enough to walk to it. Normally, you're too fast to walk past it. So it does put a little bit of favoring on kind of bigger units that then occupy that space. So like the kind of like horde type units, which then brings the question again: can you rearrange your formation to do that the jump and so on?
Yeah.
But yeah, single models suffer from this definitely a lot.
Okay, let's keep going. Seasonal scenario number 3 is Precious Cargo. So this is another one which has got end of game scoring with a twist. We'll talk about the end of game scoring thing, then we'll go on to how objectives are picked up in this because it is different. So this is end of game end of game scoring. You get 1 for each objective marker you control, plus 1 VP for each table quarter in which you have more non-shaken units than your opponent. We've been speaking about things that will warp your list design, folks. That is going to be relevant in this one. There's a quirk to this, so let's show you the deployment. The deployment is deploying on the short board edges, 12 inches. So this is a 48-inch space between deployment zones. That's something else that's going to warp your decision making here. And it's 5 objectives, all in this kind of plus arrangement in the middle of the board. The way that you control objectives in this is that at the end of each round of units within 3 inches, you remove the marker and it is being carried by the unit. If the unit is shaken or destroyed, the marker is then dropped. So you collect the objective and you carry it with you as you move around. So I call this the pick and carry mission for that exact reason. You've got the special rules. When you're within 3 inches of an objective, including carrying it, because you count as being carried by the unit, you get cover. So difficult, that whole terrain, +1 to your defense rolls of being shot at, which is big. You move not quite slow, you move half slow, -1 on advance and -2 on Russian charges. I think it's called Heavy in Age of Fantasy Quest. And then whenever a unit carrying an objective marker is destroyed, roll a die. On a 4+, it's removed. Note as well, that is destroyed, not shaken, which is another condition to drop an objective. Destroyed. So, what the hell are we doing in this mission? This is the mission, I think, that has the most variables to it, despite the optional rules generally being the least impactful on the game, but this fragile equipment thing, I think, is something that is huge.
Yeah, so the first thing to know is 12-inch deployment zones. The middle objectives are 24 inches away from you. Now, you can contest an objective from up to 3 inches away, so they're actually 21 inches away. So what does that mean for getting to these objectives on the first turn? It means if you don't have either very fast plus musician, if you're playing Age of Fantasy, or scout, you are not getting on these objectives. Now, this is a pick and carry mission, which means if you do have scout and your opponent doesn't have scout, you're going to pick up all the objectives in the middle, and then you're going to run, and you're going to run, and you're going to run, and they're not going to have a chance to catch up with this stuff. It's so difficult to move and like kill a unit, right, in OPR. Like if you're using ranged things, you're never going to make it in time because they're going to be double moving. You can play terrain, and even if you do kill the unit, well, the objective might get destroyed, but the objective is dropped on their side of the board then because they've been running backwards. So if we're talking about like a single rule that you need in your army to be able to even consider playing this pack, it is scout.
It is scout.
Right? Scout is insanely powerful here, especially on because of long range deployment and all this kind of stuff. If you don't have a way of stopping your opponent from running away from you, you lose this game on the spot. This is like fantasy dwarves are just like the most miserable thing ever.
Saddest
right?
thing in the world for them.
Yeah, like they have like what ambush miners that are going to come up and die. Like who cares?
You've got ambush tunnelers and you've got a spell that gives you increased movement.
And the scoring at the end is 2 VP for whoever's got 1 VP per square, who's got the most non-shaken units in it. Now, realistically, if you're running away with the objectives, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter because you're never going to realistically have less units in one of those squares than your opponent. They might get 3. If they're like wiping you out and you're not responding in any sort of way, then sure, they might get like 3/4 of the board, but realistically, you're never going to be so low on units that you don't at least take 1. It's non-shaken units. Hello undead.
Hello undead.
You only drop when you're shaken or killed. Hello undead.
Yeah.
This is like if you can get onto those middle objectives in the first round and start pulling them back and just play keep away, you're probably going to win this game regardless of the table quarter thing, because you're going to play one of those games where no one ever charges anything.
Yeah.
Because why would you? So this is the furthest detachment from base OPR, I think. I don't
each
really,
table quarter as well.
Yeah. I don't really understand what the thought process was behind this game mode, apart from, God, no one's running scout. We should run scout all the time.
Yeah.
Because this whole pack is that, right? Like if you're running scout in this pack, you're in a really, really good position. It's also another one of the things where does this favor ambush? Does ambush come into this because people might be running away? Kinda, but charging an ambush unit in to wipe out one of the carriers is good, but you're probably gone quite deep because everyone's running away, so then you've got an exposed unit on its own, and it doesn't necessarily pick up the objective if it destroys the unit. So it's another kind of weird situation where maybe ambush isn't very good either. It's okay.
Also,
I'm not crazy over it.
If a unit is shaken or destroyed, the marker is dropped within 1 inch placed by the opponent. I presume this is the opponent of the objective carrying unit.
Yeah.
So that is something that does favour the person charging the unit carrying the objective, because you can then place it out of range of one of your opponent's things. But it's an interesting setup. This is the most warping. I agree with you on that one. Vampiric Undead
definitely.
and Fantasy are quite a big fan of this particular pack because they've got scouts, they've good scouts as well, they've got the werewolves, and they're undead, so you can just get your skeletons into any table quarter and try and fight for it. Ambush is actually relevant in this.
Yeah, the only thing to mention about it is the option rules. So giving cover to the objective carriers is just favouring them once again, because if they're running away, they're never going to get charged realistically. And cover is obviously the one thing that you would actually quite like if you're being shot at. Bulky cargo is a tiny amount of speed to trim off the units. Like 2 inches less, yes, sure, that means they might eventually get caught up with, but this is a 4-round game.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we're talking across 4 rounds, that's 8 less inches. Right? That's not a lot. If they're running away from you, it's so hard to catch up.
Yeah. One of the things that we brushed over is one of the optional rules suggested for this pack is the advanced rule Fog of War, and that is a rule that means that you can sometimes play 5 rounds. So there's something that's warping. I don't like Fog of War in a competitive sense anyway, because
Yeah.
it's uncertainty to your strategy, which isn't fun.
No.
No one come
Yeah,
at me
the
for the
only
fact
thing
this
here
is
as
a
well.
dice game.
Yeah, and then the last thing is the fragile cargo thing, which signal dice rolls affecting the game. It's not fun.
Yeah, don't like that.
I don't. Yeah, it's not very competitive to have that in place.
This is the one thing about this, I think, that really tips this mission over to being what the hell is happening? This could go any way.
Yeah,
and I think because of that, I was going to say that because of that really encourages undead armies. Really encourages no retreat.
Well, interesting enough, in a strange way, this is the one that the fragile equipment is the one that least encourages undead, because they're always going to get destroyed. Whereas other units might shake and drop the marker, which means the marker doesn't get a chance to be destroyed. But it's still massively undead favoured just because of the extra VP for the table quarter thing, and also like not dropping the objective is probably more important than.
Well, I was going to say that I think that actually favours undead, right? Because if your undead unit has been destroyed and there's a chance that the objective's destroyed, that's a good thing for you, the charged unit. You don't want your opponent to pick that objective up if they've just wiped a unit off the board as well. That's a huge swing.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah.
So that's a massive change.
The only other thing to mention here as well, the objectives are 12 inches apart in the middle of the board. That means there is a 6-inch space between these objectives where you can stand and capture 2 objectives.
Yeah.
So one unit, so you don't need loads of scout. One scout unit can take 2 of the objectives in the middle. You're always going to take your home objective, and then that last one you can move up the board and play normally if you want. But that means one unit could be carrying 2 objectives, which means that you're losing a lot less by sending that unit back to the other end of the board, right?
Yeah.
So in this game especially, you definitely want to be doing that. You definitely want to be picking up 2 objectives with a single unit, and then you want to be running like hell.
Yeah. So, seasonal scenario, Under Fire. This is mission number 4. This one is you set up in the same way as normal OPR, and this one is, again, progressive scoring. At the end of each round, players get 1 VP for each objective marker they control, with the twist to this one being plus 1 VP for each enemy unit that they destroy that was within 3 inches of an objective marker. This means that catch-up mechanic isn't necessarily catch-up, but this is another one that punishes you for sitting on objectives, because it allows players to chip extra points for wiping out units that are sitting on objectives, which in a progressive scoring you want to do. You want to be on top of and holding those objectives. So this is going to be a bit of a grindy one. I will actually touch on the special rule before we discuss the deployment, because this is something that leans into it. Simply, random damage. You roll a dice at the beginning of the round. On a 5 or 6, nothing happens. On a 1, you pick a random unit in each army, which takes D3 hits with AP2. On a 2 to 4, you do the same thing, but no AP on that, just D3 hits. Not massively impactful, but it's chipping throughout the game, so things could happen with it, but I don't expect that to warp much. The board, again, I like. This is difficult, this is dynamic. Talk to me about your thoughts about Under Fire.
Yeah, so first of all, this is progressive scoring. So already we're questioning whether or not we want ambush in this. As we said before, ambush can only start playing objectives on round 3, and that's halfway through the game. The one thing that does give ambush a slight leg up here is that because killing units on objectives gives you VP, what that means is obviously your opponents have to be on the objectives at some point to be able to capture them, probably at round 1. So if you ambush in round 2, you can get a big charge and you can kill your opponent's stuff on the objective and get a VP out of that.
Yep.
So they're not completely useless here, and obviously some of the objectives are actually quite far away. They're on basically what would be the home line for the 2 normal deployment zones. So that's definitely interesting. This is another game mode where I think Scout is good because you can contest people's back objectives. There's kind of like a small spot where you can do it. Yeah, you kind of need to be in the middle of it, 12 inches up and then 12 inches further, because obviously you get the extra 3-inch bubble around objectives. So it's an interesting game mode. I think the optional rules here are probably the least impactful ones. So they have their own set of issues for clarity, unfortunately. So if you just want to scroll up for a second. Yeah, so first of all, there's a 1 in 3 chance nothing happens, so already relatively low impact. The other 2 options, so it's D3 hits for AP2 or D3 hits. It's not entirely clear if you're supposed to roll a D3 for each army.
Yeah.
Or if it's just 1 D3 and both armies take it.
We've been role playing it that it's a D3 and that is the same number of hits both armies take.
Yeah, which seems more fair. The other thing here as well is This feels like a nitpick, but I think it is relevant. Pick one random unit from each army. Does that unit need to be on the board?
Yeah.
Can that unit be in transports? Like what? Like is that literally any unit in the army? Right? If I'm half in ambush, can they get hit by this? I don't know. Right? Traditionally things don't affect things on the board, but you also gain caster tokens where you're off the board. So what is this kind of like weird vacuous state you exist in when you're pre-ambush? I don't know. But yes, this is basically not a very super relevant rule. I mean, occasionally, because a D3, like what you're getting, 2 hits AP2, that's not really going to change the game massively.
Yeah.
And if it's no AP, then it's even probably less relevant. This also happens at the beginning of the round, which is outside of an activation, so this doesn't cause morale checks. So it's relatively low impact. I think this is progressive scoring OPR mostly with slightly funky deployment zones. And the destroying things on objective things is relevant. What it does is it kind of doubles down on a principle of OPR anyway, which is you don't want to be on the objectives.
Yeah.
You want to capture them as early as possible, and then you want to just
Get
be
off.
as far away from them as possible. So it doubles down on that, and it definitely does change some decision making surrounding that, but not massively, I don't think.
Yeah.
I like this game mode when we played it. I think this is a good seasonal game mode because it felt like core OPR, but with a little bit of extra consideration, which I think is what makes a game mode good.
So when you're playing this game mode, what do you want to bring? How are you changing your army to tailor for this one?
I think Scout, obviously, is always a good thing here. I think threatening the objectives early so your opponent can't take control of them, and then you can then get them and then move off them and then say, okay, we'll walk into them and I'll kill you. Interesting enough, this is kind of a game mode that lets ranged shine a bit, because if you can shoot people off their objectives and kill them, route them or make them flee or whatever, then that's quite powerful. So I like that a bit. But like I said before, this is the least like I guess unit style incentivizing of the game modes, because realistically, outside of Scout, like letting you die with the pack objective, most of the things are just like standard OPR. So yeah,
I agree. The ones that are really warping in this pack are the middle two missions, I think, that are the ones that making you want Scout, Undead, and Caster so much. So there we go. So those are our thoughts on the tournament pack. So that's for the 6x4 game modes, 2k of Grimdark Future and 1500 of Age of Fantasy. What we're going to do now is just talk to you briefly about the event that's coming up at the end of May, which is UK Games Expo, and the differences between the tournament packs that will change the way that certainly we're approaching coming to that event. So the key changes for UK Games Expo. First of all, it is 1500 points of either Grimdark Future and Age of Fantasy. So like last year, it is mixed systems. By mixed systems, we mean either Grimdark Future or Age of Fantasy, which is quite interesting. You can use creator lists that are balanced with no custom rules. Again, quite interesting. And you have to follow Force Organization for the separate game system. Grimdark Future armies use Grimdark Future, Force Org. Age of Fantasy uses Age of Fantasy, which there are different tensions there. Age of Fantasy, you can bring up to 10 activations. So one of the things about UK Games Expo, it's a massive tournament, 32 players. What 32 players means is you need 5 rounds to have one undefeated player at the end of the day. So for UK Games Expo, the first round is going to be standard scenario within the core rules of OPR. So D3 plus 2 objectives, which will be determined by the tournament organizer, into the 4 ones we've just discussed. So an extra bit of army list warping, you need to be ready for the main game. Usual things we said, ambush quite good, scout generally quite weak there. So that's something else that's going to change it. But then those are the main differences, except for all of the boards are on a 4x4. The objectives are closer together. The deployment zone in mission 3 is 6 inches, which is tiny. You're going to get a lot of overgrouping there. This is a bit evenly more spread. UK Games Expo is a different kettle of fish entirely, I think, because of it being on 4x4s. But the core rules, I think, the core tenets we discussed are still there. You want some casters, some scout, and undead.
The fundamentals, I think, are the same. I think that the mixed format is an entirely different format compared to mono, setting formats. I think it introduces some interesting list building decisions. I think it's a shame that they don't use the same Force Org. I think giving Fantasy more things doesn't actually make it more interesting.
Yeah.
I also think that the caveat about Rift Demons, Wormhole Demons, Having to use the GDF one, I think is a load of nonsense. If they were balanced enough to be in fantasy, then they're balanced enough to use their Force Org. I don't really understand why that's being changed. Yeah, so as you mentioned, the 5 rounds thing. So we also have a single game of normal OPR at the start of this, D3+2. I'd like to see fixed numbers of objectives for that one, but apart from that, yeah, very happy to see a base game of OPR being included here.
It is
It's going
the
to be a very
tournament
busy day.
organizer rolling that one. Everyone is
Yeah.
doing the same number.
Yeah,
Which
but
is
I think it'd be nice to know what that number is
Yeah.
ahead of time. But I mean, that is what it is, so not the end of the world. Creator armies, we'll see how that goes. I think in general, probably not the thing to be doing. The army builder is absolutely great if you want to fuck around and make something cool. It is full of problems though.
Yeah, you can
If
really
people want to
abuse
break
that.
it, they can, and yeah, it will never be in a position where that's not the case. And the intention is not to make a bulletproof army builder. So yeah, we'll see how that goes, I guess, on the day. In terms of the game map changes, we have the first game mode, I think, plays exactly the same. The objectives are slightly closer together. I don't think they needed to be closer together. I think they could have still been the 18 inches.
apart.
They could have been shifted 6 inches apart. Yeah, I don't know why they've also been moved closer. But apart from that, this is basically the same game mode, so same as previous supply. This one here has probably changed the most by it, just because the objectives are a lot closer, a lot easier to get to, I think, for basically all the zones. And also, the zones are half as big, so like deployment is hell in this one.
Yeah.
We played a game on the channel if you go check one of our streams, but we basically filled the whole 24 by 12 box, right?
Yeah.
Especially with social distancing and any number of, like, if you have like eight or 9 kind of units, then it's really hard, especially if you've got terrain in those boxes. Whoa, that really puts
That's
that
where
in
it
space.
really gets hard. Same on the last mission. Having any terrain in these boxes really can scuff your deployment.
Yeah, so apart from that, I think this game is basically pretty much the same. Scout, very, very strong. This one here is interesting because instead of it being scout only that can make it onto the objectives, or very fast and musician or whatever, now fast units can do it as well. So this makes the game a little bit more balanced because you can double move a fast unit and you'll be in range of the objective just about. So I think I like this better. I still wish that it just wasn't a 6-inch deployment zone and this was a fair game where most armies could make it onto the objectives turn 1, and then you have the interesting moving objectives thing around going on. I don't think this needs to be a scout favorite game mode, but it is what it is, really. I think, you know, these tournament packs are supposed to have their own little local metas, or like the yearly metas or whatever it's supposed to be.
The seasonal meta,
Yeah, seasonal meta, and Scout is just the one for this one. So we'll see what the next tournament pack is like, but most of the time in OPR, because of mobility being how you introduce dynamicism to the game modes, stuff like Scout, Ambush, and Fast will be the talking points.
Yeah. Same, I think, for
And this
round
last
4.
one,
This one, because it's so close to where we'd expect a progressive scoring game to be, I think there is less to be said about that. But again, if you find terrain in those deployment zones, it can really hurt. It can really, really hurt. You can scout through terrain, which is nice. But then again, that's just, again, saying scout really, really strong, bring it to these events.
Yeah. These zones are tiny, so yeah, good luck fitting things in if you happen to have a house in one of them.
Yeah.
Also, we did mention it before, but we expect all the terrain at UKGE to be symmetrical. Because I think that just makes the game more fair. Some of these game modes where we're talking like, oh, you can just about make this point. Well, if there's a house in the way on your side but not the opponent's side, then all of a sudden you're going to lose the game mode off the back of the objective being bad, and then that's a 50-50 dice roll, which side the ball you're on, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
The only other thing about UKGE that's probably worth quickly mentioning at the end is the base pack doesn't have tiebreakers, and this one does. The tiebreakers in this one are not what we'd like to see from a tiebreaker. The tiebreakers for within a game, if the game would end in a draw, it goes down to the number of models you've destroyed. Not the number, the points of it.
Yeah. Which
is fine, but I'd rather not see a tiebreaker for game-by-game stuff. And then for the tournament, we're using OPT, self-plug. That's opponent win score, which is how well have your opponents done throughout the day as a tiebreaker, which I think is a really fair way of doing it, because the better your opponents were, your wins should be worth more, kind of thing.
I agree.
And I think having that system in place means you basically don't need a game-by-game tiebreaker. Like, draws are fine, they exist, that we should just be okay with them. We don't need to favor armies that want to kill things more than armies that have different strategies. Like, I think it's a weird narrowing of the rules, especially given that it doesn't exist in the original tournament pack.
Yeah. So, there we have it, folks. Those are mine and Harvey's comments and thoughts on the tournament pack. What do you think? What are you bringing to your events? Are you using these packs? And most importantly, what are you bringing to UKGE? Because Harvey and I will look forward to seeing you there. Thank you for watching. Please do like, comment and subscribe on this video. Until next time, we'll see you later.